Good evening, everyone. My name is Linda Kaiser. Welcome to The Circle. This is a show tonight with Morgan Rhodes, my co-host, and one guest. So this is the first time that Morgan and I have only had one guest, and that's a very special guest. And his name is John Lumiere-Wins, and John lives in Emeryville, California. And he is going to be talking about a subject called Brainwave Optimization. And I just want to say one thing, that I read this little blurb called How Does It Work? And it says sensors pick up your brain waves, which are then converted to sounds that you listen to through earbuds. The brain recognizes its own patterns and begins to adjust and balance itself. When our brain is in balance, we find ourselves thinking about possibilities we never have considered in the past, correct?
Yeah.
So you've got a lot of years of looking at this. Tell us a little bit about your educational background and how you got to this particular modality as a form of treatment.
Let's see. I have a bachelor's in educational psychology. And then some years later, I went back to school and got a master's in marriage and family therapy. I began working in that field, collecting hours. And I realized that I was working in other people's heads to work out my own traumas. And so I quit doing it, did other work to support myself, and did a lot of inner work until I felt clear enough to return to it. Then I was, because my history involves a lot of trauma, my early history, I naturally had to do a lot of work to heal that, and became pretty good at it and studied how to do that with others. And so that was one of the main focuses in my professional life. And the other was I've been a lifelong spiritual practitioner, and for some reason I kept getting people who were in some kind of spiritual emergence crisis, Kundalini or something like that, and or who just wanted to connect with their deeper nature. And so those were kind of the two threads that wove through my professional and personal life. And I'd heard that neurofeedback could be helpful for people who have trauma.
Will you tell us what that means, please?
Neurofeedback or trauma?
Neurofeedback.
Yes. Neurofeedback is a way of reflecting to the person information about what their brain is doing or should be doing. And when they get that information, they're able to, through intention, shift what's happening and create that there's a certain amount of alpha at this location and there's a certain amount of delta back here, or whatever it is, the different brain waves. They cultivate a certain amount of each type of brainwave in each location, and when they get to that, that's considered normal. So I was looking into different systems to do neurofeedback when somebody sent me an email or a video of the guy who developed the system that I ended up going with. And when I watched him speak, I thought, God, I like this guy. He seems like he's awake. I want to work with him. I want to learn what he knows. And in order to do that, I had to check out his system because it's different. And that's what's called brainwave optimization. And the more I studied it, the more I liked it. And then I learned that it was developed on the basis of studying these Tibetan monks' brains. And I thought, I want that brain. I want a brain where I
Like
can
that,
meditate
right?
easily and where I can manage all kinds of things and where I'm happy and I'm engaged and I'm with people when I'm with them. And so I ended up buying into his system and studying with him, and I've been doing this for about 11 years now.
So what type of patients do you see or clients do you see? Who?
Oh boy. Well, they range in age. The youngest person I've worked with personally has been 7 years old, and the eldest has been 89.
What'd you do with the 7-year-old?
It was a kid who had autism,
Yeah.
Asperger's. Um, he was on the spectrum, and basically, when I could get him to sit still, I did this process with him, and um, he calmed down. He way calmed down. And his mother, at that time, I had I was in a different office and I had a couch behind the chair where I do the work with the child. And she fell asleep on that couch. And she told me afterwards that that was the first time in 7 years that she ever fell asleep when he was awake, because he had never been that calm.
Wow.
So yeah, was able to help. And she's a very intelligent woman. She knew a lot about autism and Asperger's, and she witnessed what happened when he'd gotten his vaccines and how that's what triggered it for him. And so she did a lot of work around chelating heavy metals out of his system and managing his diet so he wasn't eating anything artificial, no gluten. She was intelligent and determined, and she did her best to help him. And now I met him. God, he's a young man now. He's about 18, and I met him last year at a party, and I was like shocked that it was him. And he's like normal. He's like a normal guy.
Oh.
He's most people with autism or Asperger's are really intelligent, and he's that. But he's normal. He's a regular teenager, which is very gratifying to see. So it's not all what I did, but I contributed something there.
So Morgan, have you ever heard of this before?
No, that's what I was about to ask is, so what is brainwave optimization and kind of what is the process? What I'm getting is that it's kind of a frequency recalibration. So what's the process there?
What I do is an outgrowth or a development that has happened subsequent to the inception of neurofeedback. Just to distinguish the two, in neurofeedback, they map the brains of 15,000 people and average them. I don't know how it actually evolved, but it came out of initially out of the research into EEGs, where they place sensors all over a person's head and measure what's going on in all of the brainwave frequencies in each of the lobes of the brain. Then they did that with like 15,000 people and averaged them, and then they said, this is normal. This average is what constitutes a normal brain. And so people would come in and they'd say, I have ADD, or I can't sleep, or whatever they'd say, and they'd measure their brains, compare it to their normal, and then the person would be asked to increase a tone or decrease a tone, or raise a bar or lower a bar or change something on the screen, and that would bring their brain to normal, to what was called normal. So brainwave optimization was developed by a guy who had, who's kind of a nerd genius, who was assaulted in San Francisco coming out of, he was working in a soup kitchen. And he left for the day. He was a volunteer. He left for the day and was assaulted by 5 guys with a baseball bat. And he had PTSD. His brain was really rattled by what happened. And he tried everything he could think of. He did therapy, and he did all kinds of energy work and massage and craniosacral and acupuncture and all kinds of things that didn't help. And then he started doing some neurofeedback, and he found that it was sometimes helpful. So being the nerd that he is, he bought a system and worked on his own head and measured what was different when he felt good and when he felt bad. And he began to notice patterns about what his brain looked like when it was more balanced, when he felt better. So he decided he wanted to develop a system that would, basically what he said was he wanted to develop a system that would help people to be content, because his idea was if people were content, that would change everything in the world. And so he thought, who do I know that's really happy people? And he had met some Tibetan monks who were like that. They were, anyway, so he hooked up with some 40-year meditator Tibetan monks, and he got permission from the Tibetan authorities to map their brains and see what was going on in their brains. He expected, since they were such profoundly skillful meditators, that their brains would be really quiet. What he found was that in some states, their brains were quieter than anything he'd ever seen, but in other states, they were much more active than anything he'd ever seen. And so in checking it out, he told me he spent 2 weeks staring at the data, and before it dawned on him that regardless of how active or quiescent their brains were, there were ratios between the different brainwave frequencies which were consistent. And so those ratios are coded into our system, and basically, all we ever do is reflect back to the brain what it just did. And so the person is not in the loop. The ego or the personality isn't in the feedback loop. It's immediately between the brain and the brain. So the brain hears tones that are an immediate reflection of what it just did. And the brain has a chance to consider what it wants to do with that information. And typically, it recalibrates itself. And it works similarly to if any of us were in a room and there's a picture on the wall which is crooked, there'd be an impulse in us to straighten it out, because that's just how we are. We're built to tend toward balance and harmony. It's natural to us. That's our nature. And similarly, the brain will naturally just kind of, it'll see, oh, that's tweaked, and then it'll move toward a more balanced state. And that's how it works, basically.
So how does the brain, or I'm sorry, how does the program change the language from what the brain is doing to music? How does that work?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. There's more notes, so to speak, in the brain. There's more notes within our nervous system than there are in our harmonious scales. So what they had to do, there were some people who really benefited from this system who were, what are they called? Grammy Award-winning artists from Nashville. And so they volunteered to use their instruments and voices to create the notes that we needed to have a one-to-one correspondence between the different brainwave frequencies from like below 1 hertz, 1 cycle a second, to above 50 cycles a second. And they created the notes that are, and then those notes were actually engineered in certain ways to be kind of comparable. Let's say it that way, so that the notes would be comparable. And so what happens is I'll place sensors on a person's head, and they'll have earbuds, and the sensors will send the data of what's happening in that particular lobe at that particular location to the computer system, and the computer system immediately sends back relevant musical tones depending on which range of frequencies I'm targeting. And when the brain gets to see itself, it has an opportunity to decide what to do with that. It's like, Morgan, when you're putting on lipstick, if you have a mirror, it's likely you'll be able to do a better job. Or if I'm shaving, if I have a mirror, I get my sideburns even, you know, because I can see what I'm doing. It's like that. So it's a mirror, it's an auditory mirroring of the brainwave frequencies. And in response to that, what we find is that the brain tends to relax out of its trauma or stress-induced patterns. And then it becomes more flexible, more adaptable to whatever life presents us with.
What it sounds like is you're trying to achieve a certain kind of balance within somebody internally in their brain so that they can function in the world. So I guess on a grand scale, I mean, how do you see us achieving more balance as a people? Since you're working with people individually, how do you see it on the macro scale?
Yeah, well, there's every single thing that we ever experience, do, or express is mediated by our nervous system. So one of the ways we balance each other is when we're speaking with one another, we have what are called mirror neurons, which register, like when I see either of your faces, and I see the way your eyes are responding and the various ways your face communicates, it's your state. Something in me registers that in my mirror neurons, and I get a felt sense for what's happening in you. And so if you go into a distressed state and I'm relatively clear in the moment, then I'm available to be with you in a way that helps your organism settle. And this is what a mother does with an infant. This is how our nervous systems learn how to self-settle. Happens in the intimacy of the relationship between a mother and child. And when you know, the mother's doing dishes or cooking dinner and there's a clap of thunder and the baby's never heard thunder and the baby starts screaming, the mother picks up the kid and says, "It's okay." She's calm. The baby's agitated, but she says, "It's okay. It's okay." She looks in the child's eyes. Her face communicates that the mother's okay, even if the baby's freaked out. At some point, the baby starts to orient toward the mother, notices the mother's calm, and starts to calm down. And this is the way this infant's nervous system learns how to self-settle. And if we don't get that, then we tend to be kind of high anxiety, agitated, and not very calm. And we need it. We need it. There's a whole component to our aliveness that's naturally relational. It's inevitably relational. We're by nature we're kind of a tribal species. We prefer to be in relationship with others, and we support one another that way. That's why it's our nature to collaborate and to cooperate. So on one level, that's one level on which our nervous systems get settled and better organized and balanced.
A lot of motivational work was done, like with sports figures or athletes.
Yeah.
Type of equipment.
Sure. Yeah, I can give an example from my own practice. A couple of years ago, there was a pitcher from the University of Davis who found me, and he came in, and he came because he got anxious when he was in front of a camera and they were interviewing him, and he was really good, and so he was getting interviewed, and he was actually selected to go to the big leagues, but he wanted to finish school first. And so I worked with him with the brainwave optimization, and basically he had a tendency to be in the alarm side of the autonomic nervous system and get anxious. So as his brain saw that, it began to move more and more toward what's called the rest and digest side of things, where he was at ease in his own skin, and he was chill, he was peaceful. And additionally, one of the things that occurred during our work together, there's a program that I had him visualize pitching a perfect game. And afterwards, he told me, he said, I was doing something with the ball that I've never done before. And I said, what do you mean? He said, I was throwing it differently, and it was moving differently. I said, cool, let's see what happens in your next game. And the next time I saw him, he came back and he said, I was able to do it. And I pitched a perfect game. I struck out everybody that came there, and then they interviewed me, and I was calm.
Oh my gosh.
So, yeah, so things like that can happen. Most of the people I see aren't here some people come to me because they want to be better meditators or something like that. Or
how would you help someone who said, help me meditate better?
That
seems like a strange request.
It's simple, actually. When the brain is relaxed, when it's relaxed out of the patterns that it adopts to adapt to stress or trauma, when it relaxes out of those patterns, a person becomes much more comfortable, at ease, present, available, responsive to life. Things get better ordered in their life. Things get better ordered inside their brain. And their mind gets quieter because they're not in the past remembering, oh, she did this to me, and oh boy, I wish I could get them, or whatever. Or they're not in the future, continuously imagining, negative scenarios. They're just here. And when we get to be ourselves and we get to be just here, in a sense, that's the essence of meditation. It's just letting go of the past, letting go of the future, being here in the actual present moment, and being clear, being open, being the awareness of now.
And it makes sense that your baseball client would be able to have such ease and being able to perform and to do an interview, because like you said, I mean, this is our natural state, this kind of homeostasis.
Yeah.
And it's like a place of surrender. When you're resisting, you're like, I need, you're creating this deficit.
Yes.
When you just have what you need and your brain waves, you have the right amount of delta, right amount of alpha, your brain's like, okay, cool, I'm here in this homeostasis and I can produce exactly what I need at any given time.
Yeah.
That's what you're helping people do, is to kind of calibrate this homeostasis in the brain.
Yeah. When we're able to just be ourselves as we are, it feels good. It feels natural. It feels effortless. It's delicious. And when the brain comes into a more balanced state, it just feels good. When I'm working with somebody, I can feel it in the room when their brain quiets down. I can feel it. The room feels different to me. The whole place feels more settled. And I'll tell them, it seems like your brain, your mind is really quiet now. And they'll say, yeah, it's delicious. It's wonderful.
I think we're definitely going on 30 minutes, so I'll just say a few closing words. Just to our viewers, the reason why we're selecting these guests for the next couple of shows is that we're really wanting to let you get to know us and, kind of showcase our family and who we are in GMOP. And I think John here is just a gem and a wonderful example of our heart. And, I think this technology is a really positive way of what we're trying to do here, what we said in permaculture, what we said in our bees episode, but we're just getting back to what's simple, getting back to what's natural, and getting back to what's real.
Yeah, beautiful.
So thank you, John, for being with us tonight, and I hope you guys join us next week.